So I am here in the McNeil Hall Letterpress studio, where we are known for our use of type. We have a lot of type here. Recently did a partnership with Hamilton Type, so we have a lot of great resources for students. Here's some metal type, lead type, and some wood type. But we were lacking a kind of a newer way to use Letterpress and combine it with design on the computer with the Adobe Creative Suite. It's kind of become an industry standard for printed materials or a kind of like specialty printed materials. I have some examples here. There's some local studios in town that are known for this kind of printing. There is Dick and Jane, and then Studio on Fire is another one. And so this is a great example for graphic design students who might want to work in the print industry and make these kinds of ephemera, business cards, wedding invitations, coasters, and to create your designs on the computer in InDesign, Illustrator, whichever program you prefer, and output them on the letterpress on the Vandercook without having to set type, which is lovely and wonderful, but not always the fastest when you're trying to have a business or work with clients. So, in order to make polymer plates, which is the method used for those examples I showed, I combined a couple of printmaking methods to make a very rudimentary polymer plate system here at the College of Design. I should face here at the College of Design. What I did was I was greatly inspired by Dan Weldon, who invented the solar printing method for intaglio printmaking, another love of mine, intaglio. I was inspired by his method of exposure, but I applied it to letterpress printing. Here's a polymer plate, and what that looks like. An example of print in black and white. So in order to make the polymer plate, I built this exposure unit inspired by Dan Weldon using very, very inexpensive materials. Now, you can purchase industrial plate makers for thousands and thousands of dollars, as much as you want to spend, or you can use some design problem solving to create your own system. So what I did was I bought a facial tanner. Here's the little brochure from the facial tanner. These are kind of obsolete, so we're going to repurpose them for printmaking. And I just built a box for that. So you can see the tanner inside the box. And this is not the most glamorous box. I did put a wonderful Jenny Schmid print on top for proper exposure. And I made it so that I can open the top if I need to replace any bulbs or remove the exposure unit. I can take out these tacks and this kind of chintzy piece of cardboard to replace things. So to expose the plates, I use this exposure unit, and you can see my size is probably limited to maybe about 8 by 10, which is fine. I use pedicure brushes, which you can buy a brush on Graphic Chemical for I don't know how much, like $14, $20, and these I bought at Walgreens for $4 to $9. They're different softnesses, so I have a softer brush and a harder brush. And then I use a hairdryer. My hairdryer purely for art purposes. And I just bought a drugstore red bulb to make a darkroom in the back closet here in McNeil Hall. So these are the materials that we're going to use to expose the plate. And we're going to go in the darkroom and do that. But to expose, I'll demonstrate here as well. I use a wrong reading film. So this is a hand drawing that I scanned and then edited and refined in Photoshop and then printed onto film. But you can imagine you could use any computer generated image, whether it's a drawing that you've scanned or some type that you've set in InDesign, and just print it on the film. And then I simply sandwich my film on top of my plate. So I just have a piece of foam that I got out of my basement. I don't even know where it came from. A glass shelf from Amazon, a piece of spare plywood and my exposure unit on top. Okay, so here I am in the dark room in the print shop at McNeil Hall, and I have my film that I've prepared. I'm going under this cabinet here. There's a cabinet under the counter where I keep photosensitive polymer plates. And these are the plates you'll be using in your project. So there's a envelope, and within that larger envelope is a smaller light safe envelope with the plates inside. So you're going to take out a plate. There's probably a couple in there. Find one that suits your design, that will fit your whole design. So these are plate scraps, so you can see that the plate is not absolutely perfectly the size of my design. So what I can do now is I can trim it to fit the size of my positive, or I can shoot the plate and wait till after and trim it after the fact. I actually sometimes prefer to trim it after the fact because that gives me a little more wiggle room with my positive. So what I'm going to do here is I have a foam and a piece of glass and an exposure unit, and the order I want things is foam, plate, film, glass, exposure unit, which is up here on the wall for you as well, and which I will demonstrate. So each plate has a film on top of it, and you're going to want to peel that film off like so. And I like to save these films for later so I can use them for storing my plate to keep the top secure and safe. So I like to lift my glass up. It's tempered glass, be careful. And I'm going to put my plate down, I'm going to put my film down, and actually, bad example, I had my film the wrong way. You want it to be reading backwards, because remember in printmaking, we're reading backwards so that the print reads forwards. So here's what it's going to look like. I have my plate, I have my film, which is backwards reading, wrong reading, and I'm putting it down onto the foam. I'm using the glass to kind of sandwich it in there nicely. And then I have my fabulous homemade exposure unit going on a magical journey of exposure. And it's actually a facial tanner inside. And the timer, I don't really trust this timer, so I use my phone. So I bring my phone in here, and I found that 4 minutes is a great exposure time for getting the finest detail. So I'll go, we all know how to use iPhones, I'll go to my stopwatch, and I'm going to turn this knob here. This knob here turns on the light, and I want to watch this glass because it takes a while for the light bulbs to click on, and once I see them click on, I will start my phone timer. So I'll just demo that. Turn this on. See, they're kind of clicking on, and they're on, and I hit start. And wait for 4 minutes. Okay, I'm getting close to 4 minutes, so I just turn this off myself because, like I said, I don't trust this timer. I'm using my phone. So I'm going to start going counterclockwise. I'm getting close to 4 minutes, and if you fudge a couple seconds, it's not a big deal. And then I'm just going to turn it off myself. It was maybe a little soon, but that's okay. Okay. All right. Now that my plate has been exposed, I am going to wash it. So I'm going to gently lift my exposure unit off, and I can set it back here. And gently lift the glass. And so I'm going to take my plate and move it over here. So the water temp you want is about 80 degrees, which again, this isn't an exact precise science. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but 80 degrees is going to feel like a little bit warm, but not hot because your body is, 98.6, right? So it's going to feel a little bit warm. And I have two brushes. This one's a little bit softer, and this one's a little bit harder. So anywhere you have some detail, you're going to want to use the softer brush, and you can use the harder brush on corners and things to wash away edges. So I'm going to take my brush and very gently start scrubbing my plate. And what's happening here is any area that was transparent on my film, it was cooked and hardened by that UV light, so it is not going to wash away. And any area that was covered with the black is going to wash away because it was not cooked. So I'm making a relief image. I'm essentially making handmade type, right? Raised type. So this I do a lot by feel and look. So I'll be washing. This might take you about 5 minutes depending on your design, and you're going to have to look at it to be able to see if it's finished or not. So I'm going to take a look, and I like to kind of hold it up to the light, and I'm looking at it, and it still looks a little bit foggy in the areas that will not print, so like the background, not my lettering. So I'm going to keep washing until those areas are clear. And I can see that my design has started to become raised a bit here, the area that will print. I'm going to use my harder brush on the corners because it washes away a little bit faster that way. And now this is going to smell a little bit like nail polish remover. Don't be alarmed. This is one of the least toxic printmaking methods. It's just slightly stinky because these are polymer plates, so it's a plastic polymer. And I'm not wearing gloves or anything. It's safe, fairly safe for my hands, unless you have, you know, very, very, very sensitive skin. You can bring a pair of gloves with you if you're worried about that. I'm still washing away at my design, and I have constantly running water because I want my water to be fresh. Fairly fresh. So I can see it's still fairly cloudy in some of these areas, and I can check in my type, and if I see cloudy areas in my design, then I need to keep washing. This might take a while until we get it perfectly clear. So another important thing when you're doing this process is this can get a little bit wet and sloppy, and you want to be careful that if there are any other polymer plates out, that you don't get them wet, because that will ruin them for any future use, or it could, and they're fairly expensive as far as school materials go. So you can see down here is a little bit cloudy yet, and it's pretty clear in here. So I can take the hard brush now, and I can start scrubbing away my corners. The most important is to get it clear around your design. If some of your corners are a little cloudy, it's not the end of the world. You can cut them off later maybe. But anywhere you have any cloudiness, the ink is going to stick in a funky way, and you don't want to deal with that, because remember, the areas that I'm washing away were once raised, and anything that's raised on the press is going to print. It's going to get inked and it's going to print. So if you want a really clean, crisp design, this step is important to wash away all of the cloudiness and all of the polymer that isn't your burnt, raised design. Okay, so I've got a pretty good clear plate. That, yeah, and there's maybe a little bit more of cloudy down there. But I think I'm going to trim this edge anyway, so I'm okay with leaving that there. And I can see, sometimes I feel it, it's all nice and raised. And next I'm going to just take some, you can use newsprint or scrap paper, and I'm going to just dab it off really gently. At this point your design is pretty solid, but you still want to be fairly careful because it's not quite dry yet, so it's a little sensitive. So the dabbing step, it's just important that there are no major big drops of water or anything that's going to kind of like run off the plate. So I'm just dabbing away. There might be some little droplets left, but I'm going to get the rest of those with my hair dryer. Okay. So yes, there's a hair dryer in here. And be careful, don't put the hair dryer in the sink. Everyone know that you can get electrocuted. And so my settings on my hair dryer, I don't want to blast this with heat. It's going to melt. Polymer, plastic, right? So I have it on warm, and I'm just going to put it on low and kind of hold it over the top. And I'm going to dry with the hair dryer my plate until it is very dry. No droplets of water whatsoever. So you may have to take some breaks and peek at it. You can take paper or newsprint if you see any kind of like larger drops. Try to like dab them. Again, I'm not blasting it like this. You'll probably melt your design. I'm kind of gently blowing it over the top. And I'm constantly moving it around the plate because I don't want one area to get too hot or melt. Okay, so here I have my finished plate, and you can see this is a really good illustration of what happens with the shooting. You can see where I didn't trim my positive, that you can see that area there, and that's what I'm going to trim later on. That just got burnt in a straight line, right? Because there's no black covering that. Okay, so my plate is done, and there's one last step to really cure it really well. Because we're going to be printing with an amount of pressure, and these plates do break down over time. So you may get, depending on how much pressure you're using and which press, you may get 20 to 100 prints. I'm shooting for 100, but with this one. So what I'm going to do to really cure this is to cook it again with my exposure unit. But this time I do not need the glass, because there's nothing here that I need to put pressure on to sandwich. Like before I was sandwiching the film against the plate, I can just put the plate face up, and I'm going to put that UV exposure on it again to really, really harden it. So at this point, you can leave the glass on top. It's easy, you don't have to move it around. Put it on top, the wood, and again, I can use my phone for a timer. This step, it's not, I say 5 minutes to cook it, to harden it. But if you go longer than that, it's not going to hurt anything. I've never had anyone go super long and ruin their plate, but so timing doesn't have to be super accurate at this point. Just around 5 minutes to really harden that plate for use on the printing press. This is an example of printing my polymer plates. Not a perfect print. I would probably do a little bit of troubleshooting on where the ink is hitting, but just to give you an example of how quick and easy it is to print your design and how much cooler it is than a laser printer.